Welcome to a thrilling journey through one of the most exciting chess openings ever created, the Rousseau Gambit. This opening isn't just another line, it's a bold statement on the chessboard. A declaration that you're here to fight for the win. Pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5, knight to c6, bishop to c4. Setting up for the Italian game or the two knights defense. But instead of following the traditional path, you surprise your opponent with the daring move pawn to f5. This bold move resembles the Vienna Gambit or King's Gambit but with reverse colors. It's a thrilling and dynamic gambit filled with tactical opportunities. The most common response from white in this line is to accept the pawn sacrifice with pawn takes f5. From here, the game becomes a battlefield of strategy and counterattacks. This position is already a mistake for white, but most of your opponents won't realize it. After pawn takes f5, you push your own pawn to e4, creating a strong threat. This move often confuses opponents because they'll notice that your knight is controlling key squares, while your queen dominates along the diagonal. As a result, they'll often feel forced to retreat their knight all the way back to g1. I recommended the move knight to f6 as a straightforward way for black to gain an advantage. While that is still effective, today I want to show you a more complex and even trickier line for white to handle. Instead of knight to f6, you play pawn to d5, immediately attacking white's bishop. This move also clears the way for your own bishop to recapture the pawn on f5. But there's a potential downside to this move. It allows white to play the sneaky move queen to h5, setting up a dangerous attack. One of the key principles to remember when playing the Rousseau Gambit is that in certain variations, white's pawn can potentially start attacking you. However, this usually isn't as dangerous as it seems. You can simply move your king to safety, and it's worth noting that white often relies on a single queen in their attack. This lack of support means their attack rarely becomes a real threat. At this point, white has to reposition their bishop, often retreating it to bishop to b3. This gives you an opportunity to start gaining tempos by targeting white's exposed queen. A great move here is knight to f6, aiming to push the queen away. Once the queen moves, you can recapture the pawn on f5. Very often, white will try to hold onto their advanced pawn. To do so, they might play queen to g5. At first glance, this looks intimidating. The queen defends the pawn and appears threatening, but you can continue harassing the queen by playing pawn to h6. If white wants the queen to keep defending the f5 pawn, their only available move is queen to g6. At this stage, your opponents might still be eagerly plotting their next attack, anticipating an opportunity for their queen to move forward. But they'll quickly find themselves in trouble. White might hope to create some checkmate threats against your king, but you can calmly continue by playing knight to d4. The most precise move in this position. This puts white in a difficult spot, as it's now hard for them to defend their advanced pawn. Notice that you are attacking the pawn twice, and your plan here is to capture it. Once you take the pawn, white's queen will be forced to retreat all the way back to queen to g3. After this, you can safely reposition your king to f7, placing it on a more secure and central square. From there, you can develop your dark squared bishop to d6, achieving a comfortable and advantageous position. Black clearly gains the upper hand in this scenario. However, your opponent might persist in trying to protect the f5 pawn by playing pawn to g4. At first glance, it might seem that there's no way to target this pawn anymore, but here's where you deliver a quiet yet deadly move, bishop to d7. This subtle move sets up a powerful attack, and leaves white scrambling for a response. What's the idea behind this setup? After almost any move by white, for example, if they play pawn to c3 or something similar, your plan is to quietly play another subtle move, bishop to e8. This traps the queen on g6, allowing you to capture it. While you could play bishop to e8 immediately, you might want to first save your knight. To do this, you can trade the knight by capturing on knight to b3, and then follow up with bishop to e8, trapping and winning the queen. The second trap I'm about to share is one of my absolute favorites in the Rousseau Gambit. When you play the move pawn to f5, your opponents will likely think it's a dubious or unsound choice, assuming they can punish you for it. But little do they know, because in one of the most common variations of the Rousseau Gambit, that f5 pawn could promote into a new queen and deliver a stunning checkmate. Can you believe that? Your opponents certainly won't see it coming. Let me show you how to achieve this brilliant setup. One of the second most common moves white plays here is pawn to d3, aiming to defend their pawn on e4. In response, you develop your bishop to c5, placing it on an active and aggressive square. This often provokes white to start attacking you by playing knight to g5, seemingly finding a way to punish your early aggression. At first glance, white's position looks threatening. With the support of their bishop, they might plan to play bishop to f7, targeting your king, or even knight to f7, forking your queen and rook. It appears that there's no easy way to defend the f7 square. But here's the twist: you calmly push pawn to f4, advancing it forward. This move has multiple benefits. It cuts off white's dark squared bishop from defending the knight on f4, leaving it vulnerable to attack from your queen. White, however, might still believe they have the upper hand. They proceed with knight to f7, attacking both your queen and rook, feeling confident in their position. At this point, white is likely celebrating an imminent victory. But here's where you shock them. You move your queen all the way forward to queen to h4, creating a deadly threat of a scholar's checkmate. If your opponent is sharp enough, they'll have to scramble to defend against this sudden attack. This idea was highlighted in one of my earlier videos on the Rousseau Gambit, which I've already mentioned. The beauty of this line lies in its deceptive simplicity and the unexpected threats you create. Previously, I showed you how you can win when white castles. However, many people asked in the comments, that's great, but what if my opponent plays pawn to g3? I'm not sure how to attack in that situation. So, I decided to cover this line as well. And it turns out to be a lot of fun. After pawn to g3, you move your queen forward. It's essential to push your queen into an aggressive position because you want to keep attacking. From this square, your queen is poised to penetrate into g2 in some variations, threatening the rook and the pawn on f2. Your bishop is already well placed, adding to the pressure, and your attack starts to become very real. At this point, white will often casually capture your rook on h8, thinking they're gaining material. However, here's where you make your next key move. Pawn to d5. You sacrifice yet another piece, but what's the point? The idea is to play this move with tempo, allowing you to activate your bishop and bring it into the attack. After this, your bishop is ready to move to bishop to g4, targeting the queen and adding another attacker to strengthen your assault. After pawn to d5, white will typically capture the pawn. And then you follow up with bishop to g4, directly attacking the queen and continuing your relentless offensive. If the queen moves, one of the most annoying threats for white is that you can jump with your knight to d4, and then follow it up with knight to f3. At that point, all of your pieces come together to attack white's king, creating a deadly assault. However, white might try to defend by playing pawn to f3, hoping to gain some tempo by attacking your bishop. But we're not retreating. Instead, we play pawn takes g3, making full use of our advanced Rousseau Gambit pawn. Notice how this pawn keeps advancing and dominating the board. It has already reached the third rank. White cannot recapture the pawn with their pawn on f2 because that would leave their rook on h1 hanging. The pawn on g3 is pinned to the rook, and white is forced to find another move. If they, for instance, capture with pawn to g4, instead of immediately recapturing, you unleash the powerful pawn to g2. At this point, white has no way to save their rook on h1. You will simply capture the rook, and on top of that, promote the pawn into a new queen, leaving white in a hopeless position. The rook cannot move to g1, well, it can, but it will be captured immediately, and it won't stop your pawn from advancing further regardless. At this point, white is simply losing the game.